time we have one of our valued artist in residences, like our artist residence, Mark Stephen Greenfield, who's in the gallery, the Boone Family Gallery down the hall. And yes, it will be open after tonight's discussion. So you're happy alone. That makes me happy. Every time we have an artist come to share their work with us and our community, I always ask one thing of them. I say, well, I ask more than that. Mark knows that. But I ask one specific thing of them, and that is, I would like for you to come up with one extracurricular way to engage our community. And for some, that means I'll make a project. And for some, that means crashing classes and critiquing and all sorts of different ways that artists want to add supplementary experience to their exhibition. And I was really pleased because Mark's work has so much story and discourse in it that he suggested, I would like to have a symposium, maybe with a history professor if you can find one, and I'd like to have a discussion about the work and the history of the work the history that I have lived in and how that is all informed. And so a quick stalk away into Google and the PCT directory, and I was really overjoyed to find Dr. Fannin Wilkins, who teaches here at PCC and is professor of history. And when I made the introduction and I brought them together in Mark's studio, the first thing that came up, sorry, this is a spoiler, is we went to the same high school. So I was overjoyed that this marriage of two individuals was actually like a real coming together of community and friends and friends and friends of friends, as well as a meeting of the minds. And so to me, I think what an excellent way. I always think of the Artist in Resident program as about bringing, I would say, experts into the field, into our community. And I could not be more overjoyed to have experts from the field come in to the experts of our community. And so this is ultimately tonight a symposium launched by the brains of these gentlemen, and they will be freestyling a conversation tonight about the history of the work, about the history of art, the history of LA, and kind of following where their noses take them tonight. So I know you came here to listen to me talk, so I'm going to turn on the microphones and welcome Dr. Fannin Wilkins and Mark Stephen Greenfield to the stage.
All right, testing. How is everyone? It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mark, for gracing us with your presence and your work. Your exhibition is just exceptional, phenomenal, a real master at work. And I want to begin sort of, talking about, let's do this. I want to actually bring it to the present moment. All right, I'm gonna get a show of hands here. What do people do Sunday night? Watch what? Television. What did you watch? All right, Sonny. Anybody watch the Oscars? Okay, hands up. Can I get some hands up? Okay, all right. We all right. Did you get a chance to watch the Oscars? Okay, all right, excellent. All right. So we know that the Oscars, one of the highlights, of course, one of the major features was the most nominated film in history, which was what? Sinners. Excellent. All right. So I want to start there because I think there's a way that Sinners is in direct conversation with your work, or your work is in direct conversation with it in some respects. And I want to think about it particularly through a character by the name of Annie that was played by Wunmi Mosuku, who played a hoodoo figure. And I want to talk about, were you able to see the film?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about sort of the way in which she was up for Best Supporting Actress, Ryan Coogler has been lauded for the ways in which he's utilized black women actors and venerated women who oftentimes don't find themselves on the screen for how they might look phenotypically, et cetera, et cetera. And so your work is about dealing with questions of erasure, right? Dealing with questions of folks not being present when we know that they actually were. And I'm wondering if you think about her character and the role that she played. And I just want to know if you could sort of talk about that in relationship to so many of the women that you feature in your own work.
That's a tough one.
Hey, man, that's how we're gonna start off and get into it.
You know, it's really interesting. In this series, I'm always concentrating on kind of creating a balance between men and women. You know, and there's sometimes that the research takes me in a particular direction. I'm dealing mostly with women because oftentimes the research is the type of thing that goes from one person and then another person's mentioned in the same article, and I'll research that person and then keep going on from there. And sometimes it's just like, you know, a whole line of women. One of the things that amazed me was this. One of the last pieces in the show was Queen Mary, and I understood that there were 3 other women that were involved in the revolt in St. Croix, and they were all called queens. Okay, and you know the thing, they had so much influence over so many people. The men that were involved in the revolt actually deferred to them on many occasions because they approached things in an entirely different way. But going back to Sinners, which yeah, you're forcing me to recall things, and I have to recall
we can play with it, no problem.
Okay?
Yeah. Same.
But one of the scenes in that movie that really struck me was the dance scene.
That's what I was going to ask about next. Go
Right,
ahead.
that dance scene was revelatory in so many ways because it covered so much of African American history in a very, very short time. And I know that the average person looking at it might not be able to pick up on it, but you and I know what was going
Absolutely.
on. And so for me, it was really important. There was a point where I wanted to see more of that.
Right.
You know, I was starved for it. Like, give me
Right.
some more of that, and
Right.
give some more to everybody, because it's such an educational piece that was done there.
Absolutely.
Who was the choreographer on that? Do we know?
The choreographer, I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember or I recall. Anyone know the choreographer was for that? Okay. Can you pull up the image Annunciation? Yeah, there we go. Right there in the middle.
No. Looking for it.
Is that it?
No.
No, that's, which one is it?
You know what? Annunciation may
that
not
on
be
that?
there.
Okay, it's in the.
It's in the show.
All right, it's in
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah.
Can you describe that for folks? What that looks like?
Yeah, it's a lot of the pieces, particularly the ones that are triptychs, I've kind of fashioned them as altarpieces. And so that was one of the altarpieces. It was actually having fun with the whole idea of the Virgin Mary. I know some people, you know, probably would vilify me for it, but the whole idea of, you know, this pregnancy test that's given, and Joseph's in the piece, but he's in an orange jumpsuit because he got caught messing with, you know, somebody that was underage. And, you know, I wanted the whole idea of Annunciation in the way that some of the people know it now, kind of as a hip-hop type thing, where you've got LL Cool J up there announcing something. You've got somebody with a megaphone that wants to make sure that everybody hears what's going on, okay? And then he's holding this pregnancy test. You know? And Mary's sitting up there in her demure self, you know? And you've got the Holy Spirit in there, and you've got the angel, all of that stuff. So,
Well, what's interesting is that the exhibition was the first time I saw that particular one. And what struck me about it was it made me think about that dancing, where you're trying to do a lot. You're telling a lot of history in a small space, right? And it just sort of, with the dance scene, we basically went through the history of black music, right? And then of course dance and hip hop and breaking and all forms of sort of black cultural expression, right, kind of gets captured in that moment. And it seemed to me that to see hip hop iconography invoked in the Annunciation scene is like really trying to stretch and show that there's a rich history here, right? And that also, what struck me is that it didn't have a descriptor, right? Because most of your other pieces have a descriptor, right? And so it kind of like forced you to sort of make sense of it for what you saw, like we saw when we saw the movie. I think that dance scene in Sinners hit different for different communities based on your experience, based on your knowledge, you name it, right? And so I just really thought that there was a kind of way that what you're trying to do is, in some respects, very similar, I think, to what Ryan Coogler is trying to do. A lot of other artists, right? Sort of tell a much larger, longer, richer history with limited space.
Right.
Yeah.
I always try to have a little bit of fun with what I'm doing too. So if I can find a way to inject humor into a really serious situation, it causes people to pay attention.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it grabs them in ways that are sometimes unpredictable, but oftentimes best.
Well, we just recently had the journalist Michael Harriot, actually right here on this stage. Some of you might have been here, who's wrote the Black History AF, and one of the things that's unique about that book is that it's told in with a very irreverent kind of tone, and what he does is he utilizes humor. And so one of the things that I asked him was sort of, humor seems to be a kind of device that functions in the book, and sort of where does that come from? And as a card-carrying member of the Richard Pryor tradition, I value humor a great deal. And so one of the things that he said, and I'm curious to think about this for you, is that if you look at the history of sort of black communities, even if there's, like he said, even if there's a serious moment, right, where there's something going down, and then black people will gather after the moment and say, did you see how Larry looked when he was running? There's always a way that humor becomes part of the conversation in the story. And he said, what I do is not leave it out, because it's always there. How does that function for you?
I think for me, and I take this very seriously. Since the series grew out of the Black Madonna series, and I think if you noticed in some of those pieces, you actually have something going on in the background. I think that I always want to create some sort of subtext to whatever it is that I'm doing, because I know that it's going to be open to all kinds of interpretation, and I don't really want to put restraints on that interpretation. I want it to be kind of a fluid type of thing. Some people will come up and ask me a question about a particular piece, and it will give me a perspective I may not have paid attention to. It's like they noticed something that I didn't. So, in so many instances, a lot of this stuff happens in the subconscious. And I think to a large extent, that's one of the driving forces. Understand, too, that I think I mentioned this when I did my lecture, that I'm a fallen Catholic, okay, and proud of it. And a little bit of both. But, there's almost kind of a revenge fantasy that's like the undertone for a lot of things that I've done in the work. So when I take something that is so revered as the Virgin Mary and the child, it has this other subtext that I think is equally as important. And I'm actually entreating the viewer to discover that. find it. I'm happy to explain where I was coming from with it, but I'm even more interested in how somebody else interprets it. You know, when I was doing the whole series on blackface, where I caught a lot of hell, I was always interested in people's reactions to it and also their interpretation of it, how they saw it. Did they see it as being, in some way, an educational tool? Did they think that you know, some people thought I was actually glorifying blackface in that series. Far from it, you know. But I realized
Seems
that
like Kara Walker kind of also experienced a little of that.
a little bit, yeah. You know, it's the thing I was really trying to do was change the context and create something that gave you an entry point. And so with a lot of the blackface things that I was doing, I would overprint them with text in the form of an eye examination chart. And it would spell out sometimes the indignation of what it is that you were looking at. In some instances, what you might have thought the person in the photograph was actually saying. And oftentimes I'd find that people would engage with the text before they engage with the image, which was what I wanted to happen. Because the text actually gives you that entry point, and it also buffers your reaction to what it is that you're looking at. And I think I mentioned this before, that when I first started doing it, I got a lot of blowback, primarily from African Americans, because in my parents' generation, it was the type of thing you just didn't talk about.
Taboo, yeah.
You know, it was just the third rail, you don't touch that, you don't deal with it at all. My generation, out of deference to their parents and grandparents, had a real difficulty with it. And some people still, you know, we don't want to deal with that at all. But the generation after me, you know, the Gen Xers and stuff like that, they're looking at it completely different because they said it's an important part of history, but it's not us.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I'm thinking I often use Marlon Riggs' documentary Ethnic Notions, where he really confronts, you know, a lot of these sort of negative, stereotypical, you know, depictions of blackness, exaggerated lips, dark skin, like all the things, right? And when I show students today, you know, a lot of them are really shocked and like, whoa, wow, like they just have never seen these figurines.
They think they're clowns.
Right, they think they're clowns.
Yeah.
And they also didn't grow up watching the kind of cartoons that you watched, right? Or my parents watched, right? They didn't know about little Black Sambo, and you know, they didn't see those kind of things when those were part of like the daily, landscape.
Every afternoon.
Every afternoon,
yeah.
right? And so
just before Amos and Andy.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, and to think that informs your consciousness, your perspective on the world. And I grew up in a household where that was, very much, my parents let me know that. And so there was a way in which I received it and grappled with it in a very different way. And then today when I, share it, I have to really provide a lot of context for helping them understand it and so forth. Excellent. But no, I think that's what
it's interesting. I was thinking about Amos and Andy. My mother lived on a street where the guy who played Kingfish was living.
Okay.
And the house caught fire. And he saved his wife's fur coat while his wife is in there screaming, "Get me out of here."
Oh, wow. Right. Yeah, the irony that African-American history is so filled with. Yeah, no, that's amazing. I want to just sort of talk a little bit about some of the sort of technique, formal kind of structural things that you do as an artist. There's a way in which you're, at least visiting you in your studio, there's a kind of precision to your work in terms of sort of, geometrically.
It's an obsession.
Yeah, right. I had an opportunity to visit him in the studio, and it just looked like like an architect. This is where an architect sort of designs, a building or something of that nature. So I was really impressed with that, and he actually had work that he was in the process of, doing at the time, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. It was impeccable. The space was, it looked literally like I was in Sweden or somewhere, just in terms of the design of the place. But I just want to talk to you about the precision your sort of formal training, how it's evolved over time, and then if you can go from there into sort of thinking about sort of the ciphers, the circles, the choice of paint color, the gold and things of that nature. If you could just tell us a little bit about that.
The precision actually is the curse that I have to deal with. It was handed down to me by my father, who was a Tuskegee Airman, although he crashed 2 planes before basic training was finished.
Okay. So
but
there's still hope. Like, you don't have to give up.
But he was somewhat of a perfectionist, and he wanted me to be the same in many respects. So I strive for perfection. I used to get disappointed at not being able to achieve it, but then I realized that there's very little in the world that's perfect. Okay, and you just have to deal with it. Nonetheless, I try to do the best that I can, and I look at each painting that I do as a new learning experience. It informs how I approach the next piece. And over the years, that has turned into a level of precision that I both am proud of and sometimes ashamed of. In terms of some of the formal aspects of what I'm using, oftentimes I use the idea of a circle quite a bit. The universality of a circle, constantly going around, the infinite possibilities that happen within that circle. So a lot of the pieces, particularly in this series here, are kind of punctuated by these tantos, these circles, which in many ways constitute my meditative practice. And indeed, the construction of these very much corresponds to meditation, because your respiration goes down, your heartbeat goes down. You find your mind wandering, but then coming back to the precision of doing something like that. And in the course of that, you dip into like this well of creative energy, and you just bring it up to the surface each time. I'm preoccupied with the whole idea of gold.
Okay.
And gold was the traditional currency for slavery. And so that's why most of the Halo series has gold as a background. People place a great deal of importance and value on it. I don't use it from the standpoint of it being a valuable tool for this. I just realize the importance of it for the entire slave trade. Most of the pieces in the Halo series too are people who were enslaved between the years 1400 and the late 19th century. So in many instances, there are no photographs of these people. So I have the artistic license of being able to characterize them any way I choose.
That suggests 2 questions. One intervention I want to just say. When thinking about gold, the Mansa Musa, who I know you're familiar with, Mansa Musa famously went on a major pilgrimage in West Africa to Mecca, and took something like 60,000 people, in addition to, tons of gold and so forth. And this, of course, sent shockwaves throughout the world, and was particularly important in Europe because cartographers began to shift maps based on this revelation that there was gold in West Africa. Even among the Portuguese, the first coin, the Portuguese guinea, was a gold coin that the historian Walter Rodney talks about extensively. But anyway, gold becomes this sort of, the fact that it's so prominent in the way that you sort of bring a certain kind of majesty to each of these pieces. It's just interesting how gold has functioned. When you think about the Gold Coast, you think about it as a kind of as a precursor to the enslavement of Africans initially, and then we think about how gold itself has manifested in our own communities today in terms of we think about hip hop and where the gold chain and the gold fronts and and just sort of what gold represents, right, in our communities and how it kind of coursed through. And so there's just a real interesting story to be told about that, and the fact that you choose that and have a certain kind of consistency in your work is really, really interesting. So I really find that fascinating. Let's talk about you as an artist in Southern California. And I know you were trained by Charles Wright.
Charles White was one of my teachers.
Right, okay.
I was involved in, there used to be a program that was sponsored by the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company.
Okay.
It was called Tutor Arts. And Charles White was one of the teachers, John Riddle was one of the teachers, Bill Pajot was a teacher. And on Saturdays, they would gather all the students that had some sort of talent at Otis Art Institute.
Okay.
And we were actually studying with live models. Okay, and for many of us, it was an exercise in maturity because we were all adolescent boys and we were like, look at that. That looks good.
right.
But it once we settled down and got to it, then we started to understand the importance of actually understanding how to construct the human body in a drawing. And that's something that sticks with you. It's really interesting when we talk about precision. One of the things that I realize is that over the years I've actually developed the ability to look at something and tell the difference between 2 inches and 3 inches, or in some instances 24 inches, stuff like that, because I've seen it so many times that the mind registers like that. The same thing holds true sometimes for the artistic practice, where you do something after a while and it becomes so integrated in your personality that you don't even think about it. You do it unconsciously, And I would venture to say that with this particular series, there's a lot of that going on.
So when you think about sort of the John Otterbridges, the Horace Tapscotts, the Watts Prophets, so many, so much artistic talent that came particularly out of the era that you came of age in late 60s, early 1970s. We see an explosion with sort of, Black power and questions around the Black aesthetic and what does it mean to be an artist. You talked about your own sort of childhood and growing up in a kind of unconventional context, living abroad for a chunk of time in your early years, and then coming to the States and sort of trying to find your footing and your way. And then going to Los Angeles High School. Both of us we're both proud Romans. Yeah, and I'm just wondering if you could just sort of talk about, or how do you think about yourself as an artist within this kind of constellation of artists that have really been quite significant in terms of Southern California. Let alone the early years where people like I was fortunate. And not to brag, but I was fortunate once to spend time sitting on the step in Kyoto, Japan, talking with Roy Ayers, who's a graduate of Jefferson High School, also the same high school that Barry White also attended. And these are all luminaries and figures. I'm just wondering how you see yourself as an artist within the context of these figures in this sort of moment of kind of artistic renaissance in lots of ways.
I think I came along at a really interesting time. There were the Betty Sars, the John Otterbridges, and all the known people, and they started to get attention. Because think about it, for the longest time there weren't that many venues that would show African American art.
Absolutely right.
And particularly art that dealt with, say, the struggle or Black nationalism or anything like that. There was a certain avoidance on the part of the galleries of anything. They didn't want anything that was political. And so, once you start realizing that, you say, well, why am I, you start to question, why am I doing this? And the idea of, some sort of financial success, I think is looming out there somewhere, but you realize that you're probably not going to be able to make it doing this. I tell my students all the time, it's like, get a job to support your ability to do the work. Because what you're doing is a passion, and this country does not support passion on any level. If you're very lucky and you make the right connections, stuff like that, things may happen for you. But I was coming up at a time where there was a ceiling in terms of how many people could be recognized. It's like, the fashion designers, for instance, or the musicians, or the poets and stuff like that. 1, 2, or 3 people, stuff
Right.
like that, and you keep going back to those folks.
Right, right.
And I know that's changed now, but it was in place for a long time. And out of deference to our elders, oftentimes we'd say, well, our turn will come, run with this, get as much recognition, success as you can. And for some people, that time never arrived. And a lot of very good artists just stopped making work.
Right.
Or in the case of one person, Ron Griffin, he decided to make work just for himself.
Okay.
And from age 40 until he died, and I think it was 87 or 88 when he died, nobody saw his work.
Wow.
But you could go to his studio and you could see everything. And the interesting thing is now he's passed away, we don't know where that work is.
Right, right, right.
There have been situations where an artist has passed away and his spouse will take his work and basically dump it because there's a certain anger there in that the work took so much time away from her or him.
All right,
Okay.
right.
And so it's like it represents something that person wanted to get rid of.
Right.
I just wish they had called me first so I could do some dumpster diving.
Right.
But it didn't happen. It was, the whole Lamert Park area, which is where I lived for a good long time. It is arguably the cultural hub of the African American community. Things are shifting now, which is a little disconcerting. But at the same time, there is an active initiative to make sure that the memories of those people are not forgotten. So there'll be something to Horace Tapscott. There'll be something to John Riddle. This Destination Crenshaw project that they have going on now is going to feature about 12 different artists, often from the older generation. I was never in a position where I felt I could stop making the work, regardless of whether or not it sold. Because I chose to define myself by that. Some people choose to define themselves by their career, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But I wanted something a little bit more colorful written on my tombstone.
Right. Where does travel, how does travel feature in your work? Because it's so broad and vast in terms of the figures that you depict, the places that they resided. I know you spent time in Brazil, and you have, people from Cuba and different parts of the Caribbean, West Africa, of course. I'm just curious in terms of not only travel in terms of literally where you've been, but also in terms of just your mindscape and sort of like how critical that is to the solidarity and things that you're trying to conjure in the work.
When I was growing up, because my father was in the service, we lived overseas quite a bit, and we would travel all the time. And oftentimes they would just drop me in a museum just to keep me quiet, okay,
Right.
and I'd go around and take a look at everything. A lot of the subjects that I use in my work are from countries that I have not traveled to. On a few occasions, there's some pieces that I've done where, like in the case of Brazil, where I did spend a great deal of time, and the influences there are undeniable. The ceremonies that they would have oftentimes would go back to Africa, the Egungun ceremony, or ceremonies of Contemplé, or Bacukos, which is like the cowboy culture in Brazil. These things, they're ceremonies that I was completely unaware of. I went to an Egungun ceremony in Brazil, which I was not prepared for. Eguns in Africa, West Africa, they're basically fortune tellers. And everybody wants to get close to them when they have these ceremonies because they embody so much positive energy. But they also embody a lot of negative energy. So on the given night, I actually went to this ceremony and I was locked in a theater. They put padlocks on the doors and windows. You could not get out. And I was in there for 14 hours.
Wow.
And that was 14 hours of drumming and these Aguns coming out one by one, basically bestowing blessings, but at the same time, they would rush the crowd. And if the Agun touched you, you were marked for death. I did not know this going into it.
Right.
I kind of repositioned myself
Right.
because I was the honored guest. This is not for tourists.
Right.
But I'm the honored guest and I'm sitting in the front. And I said, oh, I got to get out of here. This
Right,
is not
right.
going to be right. And
Right.
there was no escaping. So I put myself against the wall so I could push back when these people recoiled like that. And over the course, I think 3 or 4 people were touched. And the death that they talk about can be any number of things. It can be spiritual death. It can be a physical death. People have been known to walk out of the ceremony and get struck by lightning, hit by cars, have heart attacks, all kinds of stuff. But the bottom line is if you do survive after the ceremony, you have to leave town because you're a pariah. Nobody wants to associate with you because, lightning strikes you. It might strike them too. So I took that whole idea of positive and negative, and I started to apply that to the work that I was doing. So I did a series of contemporary Aguns where we talk about some positives and negatives that exist that we don't even pay attention to. For instance, you take a look at medicine. Medicine is, it's incredible. It works miracles and stuff like that, but the side effects can kill you.
Right.
Or you take a look at police. Police are there to protect and serve, but we all know what they can do too.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Or you take technology, and technology is wonderful. There are all kinds of things that can happen as a result of the knowledge on how to use the technology, but it's at the expense of sometimes some basic knowledge that we just completely lose. So it got me thinking about all the stuff that has happened and the experiences that you have that tend to be fleeting, and how do you hold on to those things? Because they could inform you in important lessons that you need to get through things in the future. And so sometimes when I do historical pieces, it's to make sure that the memories of these things are saved so that when somebody really is in need, they can refer to these again. I often talk about the whole idea that these are contemporary icons. And icons historically have been known as protection symbols also. And during the Crusades, the knights would carry icons in front of the army, and it was like telling the enemy that God is on our side. And I felt that we were at a place in time now where we need a whole new set of icons for a whole new set of battles. Battles that I thought we had won, and my contemporaries thought we had won. And we're looking at things now and we're saying, we may be too old to get in the fight now.
Right.
But maybe we need to do something to inspire a younger generation to get into that fight. Because if you don't, you can be rolled over.
That's interesting. It sort of kind of leads to my next question or inquiry, and that's the sort of the role of the archive. As a historian, we lean into archives of different types to tell stories. People often think about historians as just telling stories. It's like, you guys just tell stories. What theory is informing what you're doing? But the point is that we never can quite tell the whole story, right? There's a way in which, there's things that go into the archives and there are things that do not. There's archival erasure. There's a lot of things. And so the artistic imagination becomes a really important place in historical writing, right? And I'm thinking about a book that I always loved, a book by Tom Feelings, the artist, called Middle Passage.
Right. I'm
right?
familiar with the book.
Yeah, right. And so for those of you not familiar, Middle Passage is a wonderful book of illustrations on what might have happened during the Middle Passage. And it's super harrowing. The stuff is his pencil is phenomenal. It's what it looked like to fall from a ship and be eaten by sharks, right? What it looked like to be shackled and have to be thrown overboard. We don't know what that actually is. We really can never, ever be able to accurately figure out what that looked like. But artists like yourself help fill that void, in an imaginative way, right? That sort of help us. How do you see your own work contributing to an archive that someone can tap into in 50 years or 75 years, and they're trying to understand, a Cudjoe or a Mackendall or any of the figures that you have, brought life to when there was no camera?
One of the things that has actually caused me to continue with this series has a lot to do with that whole idea of erasure. When I discovered that they were actually burning books and taking books off the bookshelves and stuff like that, I started to realize that there are important histories that are going to be sacrificed as a result of this. I'm in a position where I can call attention to those people. Somebody after me may not be able to. I always tell people too that my research is ongoing. I don't give up. So I may finish a piece and then discover new things about that person after the piece is finished. And that becomes really important in terms of setting the record straight. The thing that is most disturbing to me is I started this series 5 years ago, and now some of that information that I relied on when I was doing a particular piece is no longer available. It's been scrubbed from the web. And so that in itself confirms for me the idea that there is some organized initiative to make sure that these histories are in some way expunged, taken away. And so if I have the facility to make sure that I can continue that, people understanding this, people attaching an image to a particular movement or a particular person, that is, for me, very important. It's worrisome,
right,
on a lot of levels, because children won't have that information. It won't be available, and that's disturbing.
Who can disappear those things? She says.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
There's stuff that the people go through every so often and clean up the web and take out things that they don't think you should be reading. I don't know. It could be Zuckerberg. Okay.
Well, I do want to say though, I think that what you're suggesting and what you're today in my own class, I teach African American history, both halves of the survey up to the Civil War and the Civil War to the most recent past, and we got into a discussion today about about Confederate monuments. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the fact that over the since around 2014 or so, there's been these statue removals, and this, of course, has been controversial, and so where these monuments come from, how they arrived. There's these other histories where people are talking about things like the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the role they played, not only in erecting these statues to align with this idea of lost cause and to sort of redeem the South, but also they, engaged in textbooks, right? Analyzing and thinking about the rewriting of textbooks and making decisions about what textbooks are worthy and not worthy throughout the South. And I was reminding my students that in the 1970s, these books were still present in public schools, particularly in the South. And although I grew up in Los Angeles, I began my first year of kindergarten in Atlanta, Georgia in 1974. And so I was letting them know that I am actually a product of someone who, began his school years in these kind of spaces, right? Because they were using a Georgia textbook as an example. So the point is that, this is the battleground. This is one of the battlegrounds. I was explaining to my students, our class is illegal in some places in terms of what we're doing, the way we're trying to, challenge a lot of the mythology that has undergirded the ways in which U.S. history is told. And my students are just flabbergasted and blown away by just some of the most basic things that we challenge and so forth. So I think your work in lots of ways is part of that conversation, right? That this is not neutral territory, right? That this is actually a place, an ideological, political battleground. And we have to sort of make that clear and have a certain reverence for it. There's a lot of beauty in your work, right? There's a lot of things that are just very, very beautiful. And there's a way that you really seem to work to honor, and like I said, and bring a certain majesty to these figures with humor. And I was particularly taken with the inclusion in this exhibition of some of the sort of figures that suggest the transgender and suggestions in the piece in terms of we oftentimes think of this current moment when we think about the assault on trans communities and so forth as a new phenomenon. But one of the things you seem to do is really amplify that this is a much longer history, and we have these examples of African figures who represented themselves in ways that deviated from what was considered the norm. And I'm just wondering how do you see that as a kind of intervention historically and into the conversation today?
The subjects that I'm dealing with, oftentimes their histories are buried. Mm-hmm. In the case of transgender, LGBTQ, they're buried twice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or 3 times.
Right.
And so it's just a different level of research that is being done on that now. Mm-hmm. And there's more literature that's coming out about that, that's generated by that community, which is good, And I just felt that, it's really important to start paying attention to that in terms of everything else. I'm also very interested in people who were basically not recognized for their African Americanism, but maybe recognized for something else. And so, it's a discovery tour.
Yeah.
Many levels.
Yeah, no, it made me remember one of my favorite books is by Angela Davis, Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism. I don't know how many people are familiar with that book, but one of the things that she does there is really underscore the centrality of Black women to the blues tradition, but also some of their same-sex relationships, right? And the way that these queer women were very much queer and present, but of course were, I want to say closeted, but of course the times was not prepared for their self-expression. And but it was very obvious, and if you listen to lyrics and so forth, you can see them expressing that. And so I think that when we are exposed historically to a much longer, richer, deeper queer community, right? It really kind of disrupts a lot of the present conversation, because I think people think of it as almost a more presentist reality and not something that has a long historical legacy. So I just appreciated seeing these figures, right? And the fact that they confounded, the slave master, right. They really they just didn't know what to do. What do you do with Stagecoach Mary, right? As a, just the way she operated in the world and moved and the kinds of responsibilities she gave herself, it's so disruptive and transgressive, but super powerful. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you start getting into these stories, particularly because, as I said, they were buried so deeply. But at this particular point in time, they're so relevant.
Right, absolutely.
It's very easy to take a look at a revolutionary and consider that person a champion.
Right.
But when you start dealing with people from that community, to realize that they have a tradition of champions that goes back very, very far. And it's time that those things be brought out and people
Absolutely.
understand that.
Well, I think that your work is really sort of redefining how we define or think about icons, right? So by
It's that Catholicism thing that comes
right, right, but just the way that when we sort of talk about the ordinariness of people, but how extraordinary some of the things. What I also appreciated too is that the stories and some of the descriptors of some of the folks that you depict don't have like neat conclusions. There's a lot of mystery.
I find myself having to use, the word alleged.
Right,
it's
right,
believed
right.
that,
Right,
stuff like
right,
that, just
right.
to basically cover my ass.
Right. I was trying to. Well, I was like the gentleman that was the Undertaker, who was sort of
Oh, Chris Baker?
Yeah, Chris Baker, right?
Yeah.
Who was actually literally, digging up people in cemeteries. And I was like trying to understand where it was going, and like I just realized, wow, like, what's interesting is that these people have interesting kinds of practices. Like you really get a sense of, just sort of black people's full humanity, right?
Think about it. It's like the whole idea of dissection was considered illegal in the 1830s in the United States. And so everything that a medical student would learn was basically theoretical.
Right.
So you have somebody here who has the ability to provide bodies where people can actually do this dissection
Right.
in the dark of night.
Right.
And I look at it from the standpoint that how many lives were saved as a result of him supplying these bodies to
Right.
different people.
Right.
And it kind of feeds into this whole idea. In the Catholic Church, there are stages that lead up to sainthood. There's veneration, and there's blessed, and there's beatification. And finally, they just give you the blessing. And in reading the lives of some of those saints, I found it was pretty arbitrary in terms of how it was determined that they were going to be a saint. And I said, if they can be that arbitrary, I can even be more so.
Right.
And I look at some of the lives of some of these people and the stuff that they had to endure, and they were in many ways like martyrs. And so, I said, I can create my own saints.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I'm a big fan of John Coltrane. Any Coltrane fans out there? But one of the things that became really controversial, there's a church, of course.
Oh, Mark. Now, have you seen Mark Dukes is his name?
Yeah, that's in San Francisco.
Yeah, he
Right.
did that church.
Right. And they made John Coltrane into a saint. Right. Saint John Coltrane, right? I think is within part of the name of the church. I know that there was some controversy with the family, with the Coltrane estate. They didn't fully appreciate, or there was some, I don't know the details of some of the conflict, but I just appreciated the fact that when I went and visited that church, there were people from all over the world, from Germany to Japan, and we were all in there jamming and listening and just really kind of just doing all the things Coltrane, right? And there was just a sanctity and just a real, appreciation, deep appreciation. And I think that a lot of times when we create icons or we, venerate people in a particular kind of way, like it's showing a sort of love and respect, in a sense of connection. And speaks to, just how segments of the community appreciate a particular person, even if we disagree with how they've been, lionized or become icons.
Yeah. I discovered Mark Dukes last year.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and he's got a book that's out. It's called The N-Word of God.
Okay.
Which you should see it.
Okay. Yeah, I need to check that out.
It's hard, but I think there hasn't been enough articulation on what the Church of John Coltrane is all about. And I think, that's just, it's a blank spot that needs to be filled.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to sit up here and dominate the evening. I want to open it up for our audience to ask questions, inquire, react to, respond to, the work that's on display. And so we want to open it up for questions. Go ahead. Why don't you come up here? Yeah, that'd be great, 'cause just so everyone can hear you.
Well, thank you so much for your work, for one. Like, I just saw it right now, and I wanted to come in and see. And from the way you come about art, I respect that you bring back histories that should never be forgotten. And that you said that there was a cartoon, Little Sam Mose, that you both know about. That was it a blackface cartoon?
In previous.
I did a whole series that was called Animalicious. And this was right after I had done the Black Hatches series where you had people in blackface. What it was doing was actually taking all the cartoon representations of African Americans and putting those in a different context. Not the eye charts with the overprinting or anything like that, but there was Little Black Sambo, there was Rastus, there was even Bugs Bunny in blackface at one point. There's a group of films that are called the Band 11. There are 11 cartoons that were considered the most racist cartoons ever produced. They are available on YouTube. I would suggest you take a look at it. It's really interesting because I was using these characters in a lot of the work. And at the same time, I was wondering, it's like, these studios are going to come after me at some point and keep my head down, okay? But then an attorney was explaining to me, he says, the studios don't want anybody to know they ever did that. So they're probably not going to come after you. Don't worry about it.
And the way that you did it, you said you put them over some sort of type of text to make them read the text. That was, very smart.
I keep forgetting what's behind me.
Right.
This was, it was from a series that was called Doodahs. And they were marks that were made, used primarily Duralar, which is kind of like a drafting film. And I would draw on the surface of it with pen and ink. And it would be very spontaneous. It would be very subconscious in terms of how you were doing it. And then I would fill it in graphically. And this is where, my graphic sensibilities come in. I was doing graphic design the whole time that I was making fine art as a way to support myself. And sometimes those graphic sensibilities find their way into the work, and part of the reason why the work sometimes tends to be a little bit too precise. Every so often I have to get out of it and do something really gestural. It's like, after this show is done and this piece that I'm working on now is finished, I intend to take a deviation for a while and go into a different direction. But that's the luxury that I have of being able to go back and forth through the different directions over time. Something else will strike me, if the stories that I find are not as compelling as I would like, I can shelve it for a while and come back and look for more information on it or spend more time doing the research. My research methodology is based on, I used to be the president of the California African American Genealogical Society. And in that capacity, you learn different tricks of how to do the research. One of the things that was most important was that you find 5 pieces of confirming information. And so even when I'm doing the research now, I'll start off with Wikipedia and then quickly go to someplace else because Wikipedia is unreliable, okay? But it's a starting point. There's another website called enslaved.org that has about 130 stories. Sometimes I'll go to that. And then I'll come across a name and I'll research that name, and there could be newspaper articles that go back 100 years on that person. And that gives me more to work with. Oftentimes, though, I find that it's conflicting information. So they may have somebody born in 1804 that was actually born in 1840, Right. So you've got to kind of do it in such a way where as you reach a consensus. It's like, okay, let's say 1814. That sounds pretty good. But then you have to find enough that corroborates that. Because the thing that you don't want to do is put out misinformation. That's the big responsibility. I did a piece too that was based on one of the witches from Salem. There were 2 witches that were identified as witches in the Salem trials. One was called Tituba, and the other was called Candy.
Yeah,
And
Candy.
so I did a piece on Candy, since
It's behind
it's
you.
questionable whether or not Tituba was African American or indigenous Native American. Okay, some toss up there. Nobody's been able to settle that one, and I just leave it alone. But we know what Candy was, and we said, I'm going to deal with her. When doing the piece, I'm thinking in terms of what was happening in Europe with witches. They were burned at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had done this piece, and I had the witch up there who was burned at the stake. And then found out that no, witches in Salem were not burned. They were all hanged. So I, finished the piece, and I did one of those big circles with a slash through it. And I go into the explanation if anybody asks me, that's curious, why did you do that?
I like that. Yeah. Oh, I see the slash. Yeah, the circle with the slash. You guys see it. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah. Yeah, light.
Can you bring the house stage lights down a little bit?
I just want to say too, I love what you're saying in terms of kind of your methodology and research process and how it's iterative, like in the sense that, oh, there we go. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So you can see that. Yep. And I think this is instructive, particularly in this moment of the AI revolution, that, we might start in some of these places with research, but it shouldn't end there, right? It can be part of how we iterate over time and think through things, but we still need to verify and cross-reference and so forth. And I think that there's a way that, living in this moment of the hot take, people are so fast to reach conclusions and to be able to make that hot take. And oftentimes, those things are, not fully researched, not fully put together. So I think that that's really instructive in terms of just your own process and work. Any other questions? Yes.
I think I could never hear me if I.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question. It's interesting because I saw your work in the gallery on Monday with a classmate who's also here, and so thank you. So it's really exciting that I get to ask this question because this question came up in our conversations as we were looking at your work, and we realized that there's, as an artist and as a historian, there's a lot of context on the didactic, right, on the wall, and so it kind of makes you want to look at the information before you look at the artwork sometimes and be curious about that, but at the same time as, art historians and artists, you want to explore the artwork first, right? And then see what you can gather and then get that information. Like what was the purpose, and of course it's so much rich information, and thank you for that, it's so good. But what was your thought process in making that choice?
With this particular series, I'm really indifferent in terms of whether or not you engage with the work first or the text. When I did the series Black at You that had the text in the form of an eye examination chart, for me, that was more important then. Okay, and it was really interesting too. I find that with those particular pieces, women can interpret them faster than men can. So it's been interesting. It's like, the work would be in the gallery and you'd see a woman and she'd be cracking up, okay? And her husband's looking at her like, what are you laughing at? And then she has to explain it to him, and then he gets it. It's like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. So that part of it is been interesting. One of the things I can say, though, about the text is all of this text is abbreviated. There has been some talk about doing a book. We do have catalogs that do have a lot of the information. The only problem with doing a book is distribution, stuff like that.
It feels like it's already a book.
Right.
Yeah.
With the work and the text context, I wanted to own it, so please do.
The text is as important as the piece is for me. Otherwise you're just looking at a painting that's static and you're left to interpret what that's all about. I don't have the luxury of allowing somebody that.
Sounds like you're making
Yes.
I just want to know what was your influence of Catholicism, because I definitely see it with the
So
making people icons.
I was an altar boy, okay, and I would learn the Mass in Latin, and I would get to church about a half hour before the priest did, and I'd hit the altar wine. We ate those little wafers, okay, we just chugged those things down all the time, stuff like that. I always had a deep appreciation for the ceremony and the ritual involved in Catholicism. I just couldn't handle the dogma, you know. And I think, because I had gone to Catholic grammar school for a number of years, my first grade class, actually, I was being taught by Filipino nuns in Taiwan. And so I came home one day, and my mother said, well, what'd you learn? I said, well, Mom, we learned the devil was black. My mother said, what'd you say? So she went to school with me the next day, and I'd never seen my mother quite that animated. And she cleaned this nun's clock, okay? And it was not pretty.
Right.
But, you know, I was good friends, still I'm good friends with several priests that I know. We keep in touch. They on many levels agree. They said, yeah, it's like, you know, church is outdated and stuff like that. Leaving Catholicism put me on a spiritual journey where I started kind of exploring other religions. Then I started questioning the need for religion at all. It became, for me, it became an obsession to really get to like the spiritual heart of what religions are all about, and developing that one-on-one relationship with God, however that pans out. And I found that the Eastern philosophies were much more suited to that, and I was much more comfortable with that than with Catholicism. And so, when you go into a state of meditation, and most artists that do work that's obsessive compulsive like this actually do reach that state, you find that the benefits are pretty much the same. I hope that answers your question.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question here. Go ahead.
Hello, lovely to be here tonight. My name's Ashley. I'm an art history major here. And my question to you is, what are you working on now? What's next? And how have what you learned from this collection, how has it affected your work that you're currently working on now?
Good question. Not more than 2 hours ago, I was working on a piece. I was supposed to have it finished for this exhibition, and it just didn't happen because it was a tad too ambitious. I've been fascinated with the whole idea of the Zong massacre. For those of you unaware, the Zong massacre happened in 1787. There was a ship called the Zong, and it was traveling from West Africa to Jamaica. And the captain was inexperienced, and the navigator didn't know what he was doing. And they didn't put enough food and supplies on board to accommodate not only the cargo, but the crew. And this captain made the decision to throw 133 people overboard. And that stuck with me. I did a piece called Zong, but it wasn't quite as successful as I wanted it to be. And then I thought about the whole idea of 133 people and how often we talk about numbers in terms of statistics. But what I'm doing at this point is actually 133 separate portraits on a large piece, so that even though I didn't know what the people look like, you can connect a face with a person. And it goes beyond the idea of being a statistic. When I was in Brazil, some of the Orishas that I was introduced to, one in particular, Yamanjá, who was the goddess of the sea, she is the central figure in this piece that I'm working on. And it is a triptych. So it's 3 pieces that are put together kind of as an altarpiece. I'm about a third of the way done and that's been over the course of 3 months. And I've got a lot more to do. But I'm I'm anxious. I want to see it finished. It's going to be one of the best pieces in this series, I do believe.
Let me just add, the Zong massacre, was that also related to the fact that the captain believed that they could, because of insurance?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah,
That's the most important thing.
that's important, yeah.
So when the captain gets to Jamaica, he tries to file an insurance claim. And the insurance company says, nah, we're not paying on that. So then he gets back to England and he tries to submit the claim again. But it got so much publicity that it actually was the birth of the abolitionist movement in the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after that, slavery was actually outlawed in the British Empire. So things happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I was happy to find that one. The piece is, it's evolving, it's turning into something. It's like 133 portraits. How do you characterize those people, given the situation where they're in? Are they all frowning? None of them are smiling. So what expression do you put on each one of those people? And that's something I've been grappling with. Also the fact that there are 133, how many of those are women? We don't know how many women, how many men. And in some instances, when I'm painting a woman, I had to understand that some women were bald-headed. You know, some of them, some men had more hair than they knew what to do with. You know, so it's things like that that you have to take into consideration. I think it's going to be a pretty significant piece once it's finished.
This project makes me think about today in my class. We were talking about the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, that is headed up by Brian Stevenson, the lawyer, works down in Montgomery. And when it comes to lynching, they have an entire project devoted to lynching, where they are trying to recover the dirt from all the places where there were these lynchings. Oftentimes people were burned at the stake, so that people don't have a sense of how these people even look. And so in order to try to reckon with some of this, this project around sort of names being written on the jars of the dirt of the spaces that people were lynched, is a way to try to sort of work through, some of that trauma and so forth. So I just, just hearing what he's doing as a scholar and as a lawyer, but also just how the imagination, like the role it plays in really trying to suture up and make sense of things that we just ultimately, we're always going to be asking questions about, right? And trying to work through and figure out. But it's the practice, it's the process that's so critical and so important to this kind of work. Other questions? Yes. Go ahead, come please. One of my students, wonderful, thank you.
I'm curious about your creative process. Have you ever started a piece with a specific inspiration in mind and done the research around it and then found out your final interpretation evolved into something quite different? What was that experience like for you?
Well, the piece that we were talking about, Candy, was a perfect example of that. Okay, I found out something different. Part of my research also involves what were people wearing, what kind of clothes were they wearing in 1830, 1840, stuff like that. What was the condition of the slaves? What were they wearing? I'm always fascinated too by slave narratives that include some sort of relationship between the so-called master and the slave. There was one case in particular I'm thinking of in St. Croix, which at the time was a Danish territory, where there was a consensual relationship between a slave and her master. And she discovered that there was a plan afoot to basically kill him the next day by all the slaves. And he woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning and freed everybody before it could happen. I'm thinking about how I would characterize that, and I'm not quite sure. I don't, in most of the paintings that I do, I usually don't include more than the subject. And that's intentional, because I don't want to draw any attention away from the subject. So, I don't know, I'll wrestle with that one and figure it out how to do it.
All right, gotcha. Time for one more. Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
I just want to say something. I've admired your work for a long time. You probably don't remember me. I'm Jose Gomez from Cal State LA.
Oh, yes.
And we had you at Cal State LA. He's one of our alums, and we're very proud of him there. And I've really appreciated your works, and I just want to thank you for being here at Pasadena City College. In fact, I had in the back of my mind, it'd be really good to have at Pasadena City College. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, hey,
All right.
I'm sorry I'm late. I came running over here, and I'm sorry I missed it. But I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you put on this, wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for coming. This residency has meant a lot because it's literally 3 miles from my house. And residencies in the past have been like someplace else. And this has really been a joy.
You have a residency, I have a presidency, and I'm about 10 minutes. So we're both home, right?
That's great.
Is it possible that, I know you say you're a lost Catholic, but you might have found it, you went through the stages, and a saint is not declared a saint for miracles they perform during their life. A saint is declared a saint for miracles that happen
Yeah.
after they're dead by someone invoking their blessing or their power. And to me, these saints, through you, have caused the miracles hanging on those walls.
I'm sorry?
The miracles hanging on those walls.
Ah,
Could it be?
could be. No, it could be. Absolutely. I like I said, when it came to the church and its determination as to who should have sainthood, it's always been a mystery. To me, at least, because I know there's one specific case. One of the pieces in the show is called Anastasia, and she was in Brazil. Her master treated her pretty harshly. The master's mistress treated her even more so, to the point where they actually put a metal muzzle across her face, which cut into her skin, and it was made out of lead, so she developed lead poisoning, and she died. Now, the thing I found interesting is that towards the end of her life, she was a healer, and she would actually administer to some of the slaves, and she healed people. And the master's son came down with some disease. He was going to die, and she saved him. And everybody said it was a miracle because there had been so much death as a result of this disease. So people in Bahia, in Salvador, petitioned the Catholic Church. They said she should be a saint because she has performed miracles. And at the time, that was one of the prerequisites. You had to do something like that. And the church refused to do it. And they petitioned for nearly 100 years. And to the point where behind the main cathedral there, they've created a shrine to her. They tried to take the shrine down a couple of times, and people went nuts. They said, no, don't touch that. Every time they've tried to destroy it, they've rebuilt it. Okay? And so she may never become, in the traditional words of Catholicism, a saint. But to the people there, she is. Francisco Manacongo, who was it's hard to explain, but he was different. He refused to wear men's clothes the whole time. And so they were going to kill him, but they found out that the tribe that he's from in Africa, it's an accepted practice to have these homosexual relationships. And they realized if they killed him, they could have a revolt on their hands. And they didn't want to deal with that. So the Spanish Inquisition just kind of like looked the other way. They wanted to burn him at the stake, and they said, no, just let him go, because it's too much trouble. We don't want to deal with that, okay? So I'm looking at the example that people set. the barriers that they broke on a lot of levels, particularly at a time of that it was difficult to break those barriers. And that effort alone, for me, constitutes a level of sainthood. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I have artistic license to make them saints or not. I may do a series about the devils.
There we go. Well, I want everyone to join me in thanking our guests today. I just want to say, too, I just want to acknowledge Stephen being, of course, a resident of Altadena, also was impacted by the fires, but luckily much of things were spared and they were able to recover relatively quickly. But Altadena being a space where we have so many great artists in the community, to think about the possibility of things that you've produced and created being destroyed, and the fact that it wasn't, it just speaks to just what exists in that community, right? And so I just want to say, Pasadena City College, of course, was kind of played a critical role as a sort of central place to be a kind of triage location in that moment. But I'm happy that you all were able to recover quickly, and that your neighbors and others have been able to do that, as well as others continue to struggle. But I think, again, when we think about loss, when we think about the transatlantic slave trade, we're talking about human beings, we're talking about poets and musicians and healers, philosophers, medics, priests. And so your work gives us a visual representation of the broad range of humanity that was forced in those ships and brought to these shores. So it's just so significant and important. And so thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, Mark and Fannin, for hosting us tonight. So the gallery is going to be open. I might have to run over and open it. In the meantime, there are some snacks and some water. I know it's hot right outside. So please have some refreshments, and I'll see you in the gallery. And you can talk with artists and Professor Fannin as you see them socially. All right, thank you.